Alrighty. So now we're going to go into Caltopo part three, and then a little bit on fire evacuations and managing fires at the end. So let me go ahead and share this screen. There we go. Get back up on PowerPoint for now. Here we go. All right. So part three, I don't need AI, thank you. Um, we're going to talk about, come on, there we go. Large incidents, managing large incidents. Our plans are done. Now, what do we do? This doesn't really fit in with Caltopo directly, but it's something we roll into every class just as a best practice. How do you deploy teams in the field? How do you track teams in the field? Working with tracks, naming conventions and track cleanup and so forth. And then working with map settings to efficiently manage large data sets. So I've got a lot of different mini topics in here, but they're all kind of important because it's often the point in a search where things start to unravel a little bit, where you have a lot of data to manage and so forth. Let's start with the what I call the crush. I'm sure we've all been to searches where you show up at 7:30 for the briefing, and then at 9:30 you're still standing in the parking lot and there's one person trying to brief all 100 and whatever searchers, and it's taking forever because the process is linear and it's not super efficient, right? So how do and believe me, we've learned from numerous mistakes. Here's the campfire in Paradise where we had up to 900 people a day towards the end of the initial week, and including mixed resources like National Guard and stuff. So it was really hard to manage, and we learned a lot of lessons on the way about how to get searchers in the field quickly. Because every time, every 15 minutes you delay or whatever, you're costing multiple searcher days in searching time. So how do we do it? So here's our strategy, and I'm sure, your processes might be different up there, but we basically have sign-in sheets where every agency signs in. We have T cards with typing, type 1, type 2, type 3, ground and medical status and so forth. And then one of the things we mark in each IAP is the section on the personnel page that shows essentially agency reps. So when you have incoming mutual aid resource, we always say, okay, you're coming from, Nevada County. Who is the head of your team? And and what's their phone number? And I put that in the IEP because in the morning, as soon as that person gets there, I'm going to go to that agency rep and say, here's what we're thinking about using your team for today. And I'd love for you to break your guys into small teams of 3 or 4 using our T cards, and then we'll get you out quickly. During the general briefing, sometimes we'll cheat a little and just have the plans section chief give most of that general briefing. All of the plans and ops people who are not busy directly addressing the general briefing, operational briefing, they're in the back somewhere matching all of the teams up to the assignments that are the highest priority, right? So even if we have 300 people there standing in the parking lot, we're going to have, 6 or 7 people in the back matching all these teams up. And that starts before the general briefing, even as the teams roll in. So, with any luck, by the time that operations briefing is done, everybody's been matched up to those initial assignments. Okay, I got team 105 from Nevada County. I want them deployed on segment Alpha Kilo or whatever to start. So what I need to do is a span of control exercise now. So I got all knowledgeable ops and plans people briefing teams out there. So one briefer ideally for 4 to 5 teams. So, if I have 200 people to brief, I've probably got 50 teams close to that. So I would love to have, 8 to 10 people briefing. And then I'm going to get everyone out of that parking lot in 30 or 40 minutes if I do my job right. And the operations section chief supervises that deployment. They will send the 104 form that has the names on it, a copy of that to the team, to the ops, to plans and comms. Oh, I'm sorry. This is the thing I can't override there. Um, and then so everyone's out there briefing in hopefully 30 to 40 minutes max. Everybody has been alerted as to what their assignments are, who their team leader is, and so forth. And a lot of the information is based on what we received from each of those county reps who came in from different agencies. So we go all that stuff out. If we're doing divisions and or groups, we have a different process. If our main briefing is at 8 a.m., we'll tell those guys to be there at 7, and we'll brief all of the division supervisors and group supervisors early and say like, okay, like at the campfire, what we would do, we say, okay, you're going to be the division supervisor for Division Bravo, and I'm giving you these 7 counties, and you're going to have around 75 people today. And here's your general plan for today. You're going to search the footprints of these 300 houses or whatever it is. And as soon as our general briefing's over, you're going to be released. You're going to call your counties over to the corner and send you out. Because I'll tell you what happened the first day. This is one of those life lessons. The first day, Matt Jacobs and I wrote hundreds and hundreds of team level plans for hundreds of searchers who came to that fire. And it was a disaster because it took us like an hour and a half to get everyone out. And the other thing that happened was we were mixing teams from different counties together. So we would get halfway through the list, and then these guys would come up. I'd give them their plan, their assignment, and they say thanks a lot. Then they'd come back in 5 minutes. They're like, all of our trucks are gone. The earlier teams took all of our equipment. Like, how are we going to get out there? And so, like, there were a bunch of like operational screw ups and things like that that we caused because we split up counties, right? So, if I stick a county and hold them together as one, they know their own capabilities, they know what vehicles they brought and stuff, and they're going to have a lot better chance of allocating that stuff correctly than I am trying to micromanage by writing individual assignments on a huge search like that. So anyway, the whole key is the span of control and having everything matched up so that the second the general briefing ends, you're yelling names out there and calling people over to brief them, and you have no more than like 4 to 5 teams per briefer. Everybody's out of there in no time. So that is our number one, process for getting teams out quickly. Another thing when we're building teams, I just want to talk about that briefly. Matching the skills to the assignments, really important. I talk about type 1 a lot, hardest assignments. Flankers are often an afterthought, and I feel bad every time we do that. We're like, oh, another canine just showed up. Oh, there's somebody without any work right now. I'll make them a flanker. I've never done it before. Well, okay, give it your best. That's not fair to the handler. And we have a lot of people, like on our own team, who really enjoy being flankers, and they're good at it, and they've done it a lot of times. So oftentimes I'll try to hold those people out and say, like, we've got 6 dogs coming today. I'd really like to, keep you around to be a flanker for one of them. So thinking about those kinds of things can make a big difference. Strong team leaders with experience, local knowledge is a big deal. Like if we have a search in a very remote area that none of us know very well in the overhead team, or a few of us, let's say, what's great is you kind of split up those guys that know the area well, and you put them in different teams, and they become huge assets in those teams. So one of the things I like to do is ask the host agency, like, hey, uh, you know, are there 10 people here that we can allocate to different teams and really spread the knowledge out there that know the local areas? They know the lingo or the slang for some of the areas that are out there, 'cause it doesn't say it on the map. All that kind of stuff comes in really handy. The other thing I insist on, the farther you are out there, the more important real live medical skills are. And as I mentioned earlier, preferably people who do medical stuff for a living, whether you're a doctor, an EMT, a paramedic, a nurse, whatever, it's so important as you get further and further from help, from quick help, think about how you're going to do that. And if you're dropping people out of helicopters in remote areas, the helicopter may not be there when it comes time to pick them up. And if you have an injury, they're going to have to be self-sufficient for quite a while. And I already mentioned county teams only versus rainbow teams. And I gave you my example, rainbow meaning blended teams from different counties. You know, it sounds great in concept. Sometimes it doesn't work due to logistics. And I'll give you another very brief example that happened on our team. We had a rainbow team on a Yosemite search many years ago and nearly had a fatality. And one of the issues that occurred was we had like 2 EMTs on the team, but neither of them worked, and no one really knew which one knew what they were doing because they had different views of what was going on. And we had a severely injured person. It was like, if we'd had an ER nurse on that team, that would have been a much better outcome, let's say. So thinking about, quality working medic people is a big deal. And then carefully evaluating team sizes. As I mentioned, smaller is better, especially in the new Caltopo era with the mobile app, because it just gives you, as long as you're comfortable managing a lot of moving pieces, it gives you a lot more pieces to move around. You can be quick on your feet, more responsive, that kind of thing out there in the field. I already talked about the deployment summary. That's a great thing. And here's an example from the campfire where these are counties. Each yellow sticker is a county, which might be 20 or 10 to 50 or 75 people. And the blue lines separate the divisions. And then there's the paperwork for the divisions. And we're just in there moving yellow stickies around until we have the head counts kind of balanced. And it was quick and dirty, but it worked really well after the disastrous first day or two where we were trying to write team level assignments. There's a great time and place for divisions and groups. And we ended up with a lot of groups too because we had mixed resources doing all kinds of interesting things out there. So there you go. Real-time tracking the field. Most of you know this. Um, I think this works the same in Oregon, but you can order from the National Guard nano devices, which are essentially N-reaches for military, and they will show up, at least in California, they'll show up with big boxes of them. They'll do just-in-time training for you, and they'll set up all the software, and you can interface it with Caltopo as well. So it works great when we need it. Some counties down here use these Kenwood Fleet Suite Sync radios, especially counties that have very terrible cell coverage because each time you ping your mic or if you move more than a certain distance, it will actually put a ping on the Caltopo map and you can kind of see where your guys are out there. I think that'll be less important now that the Caltopo map has access to T satellite where you can see everybody live. This will all look kind of archaic, I think, in 5 years, honestly. It's going to be such a different world for tracking teams remotely in the field. Now I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about managing large data sets on big searches. This is a real big search in California that we had about 8 or 9 years ago. And I was heavily involved and Matt was involved. And we learned a lot of things that changed our workflow and changed some of the Caltopo features as a result. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go over to my map. I'm going to kind of show you the before and after and how to organize data in a nice clean way. So stand by one while I switch. There we go. That should work. There we go. Okay, so this is the actual search as we completed the search. And this is before we'd really thought through a lot of things about how to manage data. And why this is a good example is it was kind of during the time that people were transitioning to Caltopo from TNP and other systems. And it was also run by probably 4 different counties that did things 4 different ways. So it was probably as much confusion as you could get in terms of how to manage data. So I want to talk about some of the issues that you have in a large search like this with a lot of data. So in this case, we kind of have default folders, some of which are empty, like tracks and data and assignments. That one's actually got assignments in it, but they were written as polygons rather than Caltopo assignments. So that was an issue. The markers folder, which is the generic default folder, has a bunch of stuff in it, but it's kind of mixed together. There's the ICP, that's great. We had a canine alert. I guess that's a clue. We know the PLS, that's kind of a clue. It's important. We have a track, I don't know what that means. We have a footprint, I don't know what that means either. And then I go down here and I have one folder called lines and polygons, which is the default. And you can see we have mixed Garmins in here mostly. And we don't have our teams labeled or anything. Someone just uploaded the tracks but never labeled them. So active log 006 is different than active log 006 and that sort of thing because Garmin used to spit out pretty generic descriptions of their track names and things. So I don't know what was done when, and everyone's a random color and stuff like that. So this is pretty hard to follow. So I'm like, if I'm handing this search off to a new management team. Let me just get rid of some more real estate here. So if I'm handing this off to a new search management team, it's a pretty hard story to tell. I'm like, okay, here's all the stuff we've done, and there's kind of the assignments we did on different days, but it's a little hard to see. You can see my tracks in there. Like, yeah, it's hard to, you know, assimilate what happened and understand it. And it's even harder to communicate the progression of the search because the data is really just in a couple of separate buckets and it's not very clean. Oh, here's some more clues at the bottom in a different folder. So like we really struggled with that and this is I think I was on the last day of this and I made as big a mess as the rest of us all did throughout this. And we started learning from that you've really got to get hold of that data and do it in a very clean way from early on. So now let me jump to like an after case here. So let's say this is the search, but the data is organized in a different way. And it took me a long time to organize this data because I had to kind of reconstruct what happened. But I don't really care about assignments that much, so I'm going to turn them off because I only care about tracks, which are the record of the search. So if you're coming in to take over the search for me, I'm like, okay, here we go. Let's start with important markers. Our CP is down here. This is where we are right now. Here's where our missing person started, where they went missing at a campground. They were last seen there. They vanished. Here's a 1 mile radius just to give you some perspective. And here's a whatever that is, 5 mile radius. And that gives you kind of an idea of the terrain we're working in. It's next to this big lake and so forth. Here's what we know so far. Important clues are very few. I turn on the important clues folder. We had a voice call that was heard up in this area, but we hammered it and we could not find anything else. We had canine alerts by the water and a canine alert by the camp, but not much more. We later found out that people dump ashes there a lot at that point when people die. And so it could be you get false alerts from that sometimes. We found a footprint here, we found some footprints there, and so forth. And that's really all we've got. We have some minor clues that we're not, super firm on, but we have game cameras out there. Notice I have camera symbols on them now, so I know what they are when I see them on the map. And we pulled those, and the missing person did not walk by there. But we did find a footprint further south, but it could have been a hunter for all we know. So we're not really sure what happened there. And that's pretty much what we know. But let me walk you through the progression. So during OP2, you can kind of see these light blue tracks. This is where we started our search, kind of in a hasty mode and so forth, which kind of made sense. And then these are actually even only, they're 12-hour OPs. So these are like daylight searches that skip odd operational periods. Next day, we got a whole bunch of mutual aid resources. So you can see we really concentrated a lot more in the area where the person went missing and some other high probability areas, including areas that have steep slopes and such. And then the next day, we expanded further out. And you can see by the dashed lines, we had good air assets that day. We did a lot of aerial searching as well with negative results. And yesterday, there were a bunch more outlying areas we really wanted to hit, and we got those covered in green, and we did, I think, a pretty good job there. And then we lost some of the detail on where these tracks were because we didn't keep track of it very well, but I filled those in with a different color at the end. So you can kind of see, like, I can actually see the progress of the thought process, and I can also see pretty clearly, like, some mistakes we made or things that we should do better. And one that bugged us, we went back even several years later and really hammered. I'll just show you really quickly. See this inspiration point here, and that is a big steep slope up there falling off this ridge line. And we covered it up to the ridge line, but we didn't search the base of it on the other side. So we went back and did that later. But it's a very easy story to kind of follow that way. And I could hand that off to a management team without too much work. But starting with the kind of the clutter here, it's really hard to hand something off. You can kind of say, well, here's what we got done, and and so forth. I hope that makes sense, kind of, and it makes the longer the search is, it gets exponentially more important to really do a good job of quantifying all your data. I'm going to show you like some more ways we do that. Um, should be back on this one. Do you guys want to go through the track cleaning, or given time, should we just skip that one and stay on the more important stuff? What do you think?
Yeah, let's do some track cleaning real quick.
What what's that?
Yeah, let's do some track cleaning real quick.
Okay, let's do a quick track cleaning then. Stand by one. Let me pull it up. Caltopo, and I'm going to import. Hang on. What's going on here? Stand by. There we go. There it is. Okay. And this is the import export dialog, which I didn't explicitly show, but if you want to save all your stuff, you just export everything and select all the checkboxes. And if you want to import stuff, you do the opposite then. So here's a bunch of tracks. I'm going to click on one of them because it'll center the map on it. And I'm up in the Sierra Nevada, so that's fine. And I'm going to change my map layer to something that looks a little more clean just for visibility's sake. Let's see where to go. Nope, I don't want that. There we go.
We're still in the PowerPoint.
What's that?
You're still seeing the PowerPoint screen.
Oh, I'm sorry. Got ahead of myself. Sorry about that. Google Chrome. There we go. Is that working?
Yes, thank you.
Yep.
Sorry about that. Okay, I'm going to leave it on this map view for now. So this is that same search I just showed you, and I just selectively picked a couple tracks out of it that are dirty. And I didn't focus on it, but I did a ton of track cleanup on that second set. And even it was really important in the Garmin days because people would turn them on and off at the wrong times. You'd have big straight lines and things. But you have a similar thing with the Caltopo mobile app. Sometimes things just jump around and make noise all over your map. Other times people will pause it and turn it back on. It'll do similar things to the old Garmin days. So I think it's pretty important to constantly clean up tracks. And again, it's not something that someone who's at the command post has to do. You can have someone back home sitting in front of their TV, clicking through, cleaning up all the tracks. So it's a great thing to outsource to team members or other people who have more time away from the command post. So here we go. Let's talk about a couple different cases. I'm going to turn all these off and just do one at a time so it's more clear. Let's start with the black one. So actually the command post is down here in the lower left, and then the search area was this loop up on the top. So obviously someone checked their GPS at the command post and then paused it and turned it back up on the same track name up here, and then you got a straight line between the 2 points. So I want to get rid of that stuff because it's just making noise on my map. So when I zoom in here, I can kind of see where they parked here and where their actual search started. They're getting out of their cars right there. So I'm going to click on this line just to the left with a left click. And actually, sorry. Oh, yeah, that's right. And see the word transform here. I'm going to click on transform, and I get a big menu of stuff you can do to a line. But what I want to do in this case is split it. So I hit split and then update the new line's color so I can see that it correctly split it, and I hit OK. So I'm going to go back out here for a second. You know what? I'm going to do an even cleaner map so we can see all the color better. 1 second. Let me do road map. Where's that? Road. There we go. There. Doesn't get much cleaner than that. Okay. So now I've split it. I've got a bunch of garbage on the left in red, and I've got my clean track in black on the right. So I can just click on the red one now and say delete, right? So now I've got a nice clean segment there. So then I'm going to do another one here. Let me click on the next one. This one has a similar problem where they turned it back on for a second when they parked or something. So I want to get rid of this straight line. So I'm going to go right here, left click, transform, split. Okay. And then hopefully I got a different color. It's maybe hard to see, but those are two different greens. And I delete that one. So that's nice and clean. There we go. So now I got two clean tracks. Let me do another one. Blue. What's going on here? Actually, blue track looks pretty good. I don't want all this driving on the road up there necessarily, but I might leave that on there because they did cover the road at least. So I'm actually going to be okay with that one. And then next one is in another county or something. Oh yeah. So that one shouldn't even be here. That's someone's old track they imported for no reason. So I'm just going to delete that one. And then I'm going to go to the next one here, this purple one. And let's see what we got here. So purple one has a similar problem where it has these straight lines in here. And I'm just going to need to split it. I'm sorry, let me mute this again. Try to anyway. There we go. And I'm going to split this here. Transform, split, boom. And then actually the light blue cyan is the part I want. The purple part is garbage. So I want to delete that. There we go. So now I'm getting like a much cleaner data set. It looks just the stuff that was actually searching. And let me just do a few more here. That one looks okay. It's got a little straight line, but just for good order's sake, I'm going to clean that up. Right click here, transform, split. Okay. And now the bad part is green. And I edit and delete. Okay, that looks good. I'll do the next one. And I think I've got a couple that show some interesting probs. So this one is a lot of driving on the road, and I really don't want that, especially day after day. But it's more complex because they turned on the GPS when they left the command post and they didn't stop it until they got all the way back. So I have an outbound and an inbound track here that I want to get rid of. So I'm going to have to split this a couple times. So it's a little bit of a different problem, but I'm going to split it. I'm going to zoom in and I'm going to split it right here where it's red and red. So actually, I can go even further if I want because this is all just driving, but I'm trying to pick a clean place. All right, here we go. There they are. That's where they're actually started their search. So I'm going to go right here. I'm going to go transform split. Okay. And then I'm going to go here because I know if I delete it, I'm going to delete half the search track too because it's got double ends on it. Transform split. And so now what I should have is stuff that's all good on this end, which looks good, right? That's all a good search plan. And then I should have these ones that are leaving this area that are trash. So I can delete this one, edit, delete, edit, delete. And you get pretty good at this after you've done it a few times. And you'll start to see patterns in how the bad data looks. So that looks nice and clean now. So now I'm going to go to the next one. This one's something you often get in granite or in poor view of the sky areas, but you just get single or one or two bad data points because of some GPS timing reflection or something. I don't know what causes them all the time. But if I go up, I'm going to do this one a little differently. I'm going to click on this and I'm going to select edit this time. So I'm going to edit the whole track and see if it gives me any clues. And you can see here, each one of those dots is a GPS data point that came in. And you can see I have one spurious data point up here. So if I go up here and left or right click on it, it says delete vertex, which means delete the point, I guess. So I'm going to hit delete vertex, and then it just gets rid of that one point, and the rest of my track looks clean, right? Or I could delete it all the way back to the CP if I wanted. But I got rid of that big distraction on the screen here. And finally, the last one. Where's the last one? Team 619. Oh, that's just a bad data. See, someone just ran their GPS in the middle of the parking lot and then turned it off. That has no relevance to the search, so I just delete it. So, compared to where I started, I would probably delete this purple part right here. But actually, let me just do that as long as we're here, just so we do a complete job. And let's see if this is a two-way or a one-way. And it looks like it is a two-way again. So I'm going to have to delete. I've got to zoom in enough to where I can see both purple legs at once. And there they are. That's where they parked their car again. So let me just split it here. Transform split. Okay, then I'm going to split it here on the other way direction. Split. And I should have, if I zoom back out, both of these should be just junk tracks going back to the CP, which they are. And now I click on this amber one, hit delete, and click on this purple one and hit delete. And there you go. So now I have a super clean track history. This one needs to go too. Oh, that's a road actually. Sorry. So that all looks, pretty clean. Now, if I make a mistake, I can always re-import the tracks that I already had if I had exported them to back them up and do it again. So let's just show you like, okay, that's a nice clean record of the search, no spurious noise or whatever. If I re-import the original tracks again, it'll probably reconstruct some of the bad data. See, it's going to say, all these tracks are missing now, and I re-import them and see I've got all the junk again. But if I accidentally deleted one track, I could just re-import that one track and then, work on it again. I hope that kind of makes sense. It takes a little bit of training and skill to get the hang of it, but when you have hundreds of searchers out there, and nowadays everyone has their phone on. The old days, maybe only 1 out of 3 people had a GPS. So there's just a lot of data you need to clean up on a regular basis. Hope that makes sense. All right, back to PowerPoint for a minute here. Where are we? PowerPoint. There we go. Share. All right, so that's kind of the before and after. It's a lot better looking. And you multiply that by 100 for a big search, and it just gives you a much better picture of things. So, how do we organize that data? What are some best practices that we like to use? So we turn off visibility in folders using the check marks as needed. That's great. So that example I just gave you, the left-hand side shows you the original folders we had. And a couple of them made sense, but they were pretty jumbled together. I like to break things into stuff like on the right. Clues important, clues minor, clues unprocessed, markers important, and I might keep that same folder day to day. Where's the CP? Where was the PLS? All that kind of stuff. Track folders, which are turned off by default typically. I would have all those track folders for prior days on my master map. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. So now I've got a much cleaner kind of folder structure. I can toggle things on and off, and I can tell a chronological story. And I've also color coded my tracks to match the operational period each day instead of having random colors all the time. And then within those folders, using good quality symbols makes a lot of difference. Like the default for everything is usually a red dot or whatever. And this is what we started with on the left. And then on the right, this is what we ended up with. Question mark for a clue makes a lot of sense. And it's easy to tell on a map that that's a clue. And then game cameras or ring cameras in a neighborhood for a dementia search. Sometimes we have 100 cameras on our searches, So we go through everything like that and organize them in a nice, clear way. This is a fairly new advent. This is from a live search we did last summer, and we had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of searchers there over the course of a week, and we missed the person. And it was a recovery in the end, but we couldn't locate them. Someone just missed them by a few feet somewhere. And so one of the issues was we're sitting there studying really detailed track maps, and it was hard to tell, whether they were people or dogs or e-bikes or whatever. And we kind of adopted a new strategy for that, or a new best practice. Solid line is a ground searcher. They've got eyes, they're going slowly, they're looking around. A long dash is a canine because they're kind of running around doing their thing, and either trailing or area. We just use the long dash. You can see a handler and a canine running around in here. Short dash is an e-bike because we think of that, or an OHV. That's someone possibly going through the area a lot faster than a person on foot. So the POD is probably lower and stuff. And then we use dots for helos, and we usually keep those in different folders and turn them off. So air track stay, track dash air dash OP2, something like that. And so now when I'm studying this map zoomed way in, I can kind of tell what day by the color. It was Tuesday was red and Wednesday was blue. And we put dogs through there on Monday and Tuesday, or Tuesday and Wednesday. And we put ground teams in there on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. And we did this kind of thing. So if you just record tracks, you lose all that important information. So just putting some extra effort, and again, it can be done remotely by someone else. just to clean that data up and put it in a very clear, presentable manner there. It makes a huge difference, in my opinion. All right. And of course, organizing tracks by OP folders and match the color. Here you can see there's still a bunch of bad tracks in here, but matching by color makes, a big difference when you're overlaying things. Use random colors on your assignments. I've already talked about that. Random colors are now persistent in the mobile app, which is a great thing, super nice. And then other best practices, creating a folder for identified LZs. Consider divisions and group folders as needed, especially as you ramp up and scale out. Consider prior assignments folder as things get I told you we never reuse labels, but doesn't mean we have to keep all those segments on the map. We just start putting them in a garbage bin inside the map, which is turned off by default, and it declutters the map. And then we try to use standardized ICS icons plus some other icons that are built into Caltopo. Best layers we've already mentioned. But and this is kind of an example. Like if someone just loads a map in Caltopo, they're going to get this on the left. But if I took the time to figure out what the best map layer for this search was, and I set it as default, my searcher opens the map up and they get the map on the right, which is a whole lot better for the search we're trying to accomplish. So selecting those layers is like, uh-oh, sorry. Let me fix that. Yeah, so selecting those layers ahead of time is really important, and it just sets people up for success out there. And they can personally change it all they want once they open the map, and it doesn't affect anyone else. But at least it's there for them, and you're giving them a good chance to succeed. Um, Once again, set which mobile objects are appear for mobile users in particular to remove clutter from the map. And we even go a step further, and that is that we have now started creating, and we do this 100% of the time, OP specific search maps, right? So if we're going multi-day, we we start with a clean map with clean assignments every day, even if we're using the same assignments. Um, and we remove unnecessary historical search data. We keep important markers, important clues, and segments that we want searchers to know about. And it makes it more secure for media and family so they don't find like 8 days worth of important data. And it dramatically improves the performance of the mobile app because it doesn't have to download everything. Even if you have all those tracks turned off in Caltopo mobile app, it still has to load all that data. And if you're in a remote area, it can really bog down things. So what we really do is we have this concept of saying that on the first day, we use, OP1 map. Then on day two, that OP1 map becomes the master map for the search. And then we create a specific OP2 map, OP3 map, OP4 map as the search goes on. And at the end of the day, all that data gets exported back to the master map. And then the OP3 map, let's say, is saved as a snapshot for that day, but its data is all incorporated into the master map. This is a real search that we had recently, and you can see the coverage, right? This was a hammered search with massive, massive amounts of data. So here's what we have. Each day we load everything back in here, and we have a really great archive of what happened, and I back it up all the time. And if we're, you know, having planning meetings and tactic meetings and operations meetings in the command post, we can pull up this master map and study it to our heart's content. But all the people in the field don't need to see all these tracks from the days before. That's just clutter, and they can't find their way around at all on something like that. So here's what we do. Here's a real world example again. I've left the important things. We found the last known point, the missing person's backpack was found here. We found the missing person's canine. We found the missing person's car. Those are all useful pieces of information to the searcher in the field. Where's the ICP? Here's the gate code and so forth. All that information is there, but they start that day with a nice clean map. And then they return at the end of the day and put all that information back on the master map. There's another tool in the printing dialog, which I briefly touched on earlier, and it's called Print to Map Sheet. And it's a new feature. I used to do this by hand in like ArcGIS and QGIS, and it was a nightmare. But Matt has now built this into Caltopo as direct functionality. So I can go to that master map. I can turn off all the markers and stuff, turn off all the labels. Let me go back to it just briefly, like this map. I can turn off all the question marks and X's, and I just want to see all the lines of where people walked, right? And then I go into the printing module and I print to a map sheet, and that creates a transparent overlay in my team account that is just a map sheet, and I can turn its transparency on and off. So here's my OP7 operational map, and then I create a map sheet, and then I have it overlaid on the operational period 7 map. So right here, I can turn the slider up and down here, and I can see if I'm out in the field, it doesn't use any data up at all to pull that map sheet hardly. And if I'm out there and I find like, a row of footprints, I can look down here and see that, oh, there were like 10 searchers in the same area yesterday. So it's really handy for people in the field. It's also handy for planning like operational period 8, so I can see all the tracks up until today, but I don't have to carry all that excess weight of trying to load thousands of tracks into my phone, or even on the desktop, because the desktop can get bogged down eventually to some extent as well. So I hope that makes some sense. It's a really handy tool, and we use it a lot. Some other best practices for the mobile app. Once again, set the default layers, set the default folders that are viewed by searchers. One thing I always try to do is send the barcode or the URL for the update to incoming resources. So, like, hopefully, if things are going smoothly, we'll have our IAP done at like 7 or 8 o'clock at night, and we'll email that to Cal OES or whoever your state rep is, and then we'll email it to the liaisons from each of the incoming teams, and then they can review it that night and they can download their offload tiles and they can ask questions in the morning if they need to. So that works really well. We consider using a Caltopo event for mixed events where you have fire, USAR, National Guard, those kind of people in there to help. So that it's more complex to set up, but it's pretty easy to use once you do it. And I always recommend downloading offline layers for the incoming searchers so they have good maps when they get there and they lose their cell signal. And then during the search, plans will usually filter the unused assignments from the map view and kind of put them in that garbage folder or the holding folder or the not viewed folder and so forth. So that works pretty well too. Map security, I did mention this briefly, but I just want to run over it again. Private setting, and that's under the I. You can set it. So if your search ends and it's a law enforcement sensitive search, let's say, I'll switch it to private, and only the account owner can access that map, and then members on the team. So no one outside can see it at that point. Secret are only people who are account owners and on that original team, plus people who have already received a shareable link can continue to access the map. And then there's the ones you really don't want to use, like anyone who knows or guesses the ID can see it, or public maps, which are searchable on Caltopo directly. You definitely don't want to use those ever. So that's all good. When the search is over, I like to create a final Caltopo JSON archive of all my data. I'll usually send that to the law enforcement agency in charge of the search, along with my rendered maps and data and so forth. We don't have to actually sync to Google Earth anymore because we have nice 3D built into Caltopo. Printing coordinate tables is really important, and I didn't really show how to do that. Let me go back and do that in a second. And there you go. So before we end, let me go back and just briefly show you how we do that on a real search map. Let's go. There we go. All right. So let me open a map up. Let me just pick a random search here. Okay. So here we go. Here's a search with a lot of data on it, apparently. Give it 1 second. There we go. All right, so I have a bunch of stuff on here, and I may have clues folders and things like here. What I can do is essentially, let me just find like markers. I can select those and turn everything else off. I go into the printing module using the little printer icon, and you'll see one of the choices up there is print a coordinate list, and I can print in all the different references um, coordinates for all the objects I had selected on the map, right? So I get a whole bunch of useful information. That's also really handy if you've created a whole bunch of landing zones or something like that, and you're trying to get that over to pilots. So they'll see it in all their different references, different reference coordinates systems. So printing coordinate tables can be quite handy at times. All right, that's all I had on that one. Any questions, comments? I know it's a fire hose of stuff. All right, should we do the fire segment real quickly? What do you think? What's that? Yes? Okay. Copy that. All right. I know we're running over here a little bit, but let me get switched over to this window. Um, and this again is a topic that we've kind of on the job training over the course of several years, sadly. And it is changing down here. So I don't know exactly what the process and responsibilities are in Oregon, but it's changing in California. But SAR always has a role. And, we find that we work with law enforcement and fire a lot. We kind of bridge those areas at times. We work on evacuation plans at times and general operations, personnel tracking, accountability. I mean, we're extra hit, it's chaos and everybody's busy. And all of a sudden you have 50 or 60 or 70 extra volunteers who can help. So there's a lot of roles coordinating special assistance needs, rescue groups, traffic control, setting up evacuation centers. We had a big fire in Sonoma and they had no one to set up an evacuation center. And they just called us, said, "Do you guys know how to do this?" And we're like, "Not really, but we know where they keep the cots and we'll figure it all out. And we know how to, run operations and we have radios." So we set up a giant evacuation center in a few hours. So you don't really know ahead of time what you're going to get called to do. But built into Caltopo, we have a lot of mapping tools that are really great. Just kind of brush on them here. They're better than pretty much what the fire guys use in a lot of cases. You have all satellites, and that's a variable amount of time associated with those. Some things are 24 hours old, some are fresher, some are 10 minutes old. You have a progression model where it shows like, 72 hours ago is purple, and then red hot is right now, and so forth. You have old burn scars from the current fire and prior fires that you can see. So there's just a bunch of stuff. I don't want to spend a huge amount of time on it, but there's a lot of accessible fire information there, both historic and current for a current fire. The Go is live and live heat, and this is the heat one I mentioned earlier. You see these bright little squares down here. This is updated every 10 minutes. And it's amazing because what you see up here comes in every 4 or 5 hours, and it's more precise, but it's stale by the time you get it. Whereas this 10-minute data, you can see something really bad is going on right underneath this area here. So it's a really great tool when you're in a dynamic fire situation. On the mapping side, we try to pre-plan, critical, high probability areas for evacuation and stuff. We specify evac zones. I think after all the fires we've had down here, and probably the same up there, almost every area has pre-designated fire evacuation plans. But during some of our big fires that we had over the last 10 years, a lot of areas didn't have pre-existing plans ready to go. So it was very, they leaned on SAR at times to help build those evacuation plans. Um, we like to identify staging areas away from the evac zone. We're probably working there a lot of the times. Mark traffic control points with hard closures, soft closures, and resident only. And then usually it's not an issue trying to staff some of those checkpoints with SAR folks. They'll usually respect it if it's a hostile environment. Sometimes you have to station some LE people there as well. Marking hospitals, fire stations, other critical infrastructure. Identifying routes, that's usually already done, but sometimes it's not, and you have to come up with a plan. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about how to create a plan, but the tools that are in Caltopo can help you size zones for driving evacuations and knocking evacuation during evacuation warnings, let's say. So keep in mind that you probably don't want to go over 1,000 structures or more than 5 square miles for an evacuation zone. That's just a rule of thumb that we think works pretty well. Zone best practice options. What we tend to do is use the right-hand side design. We don't try to micromanage each little street like we see on the left. Some people do, but it's a lot more work to write it up that way. We'll usually draw, big borders around neighborhoods or logical areas that can be driven by high-low sirens or knocked on by volunteers or that sort of thing. Zones based on evacuation routes, thinking about how that works, and once again, using property lines if you have to do your own evacuation zones. Documentation, and I think this was a specific question that comes up. We have had a lot of fires. I haven't worked on evacuations on fires in the last 3 or 4 years, but some of my teaching colleagues, including one who runs Mendocino County SAR, does this constantly, and Nevada County SAR does it almost weekly in the summertime. So they actually have some good practices. So here's kind of what they like to do. Evacuation orders, they will drive through. So orders are imminent threats to people. Evacuation warnings are you're going to have some time, but it could turn really bad. So for orders, it's kind of an emergency situation. You're driving through with marked vehicles utilizing high-low sirens. That's the protocol in California, the old European high-low sirens and PA systems. 3 to 5 vehicles should be able to complete an evacuation zone in 15 to 30 minutes. It's done in tandem with reverse 911, various alert methods and so forth. Rapid door to door, if you have time, can be a knock and talk with flyers, and it could take up to 3 hours, but a lot of times you may not have 3 hours. So that's a luxury in an evacuation order environment. Evacuation order environment. An evacuation warning environment, we see a big role for SAR in a lot of cases, and that's, you might have 8 or 10 hours before the fire gets there, and you have a lot of disabled people or mobility issues and stuff. Identifying who those people are and marking those houses and coming up with a plan to evacuate them could be critical, and you may have the time to get that done right. So you kind of have a couple different approaches here within Caltopo. We use only Caltopo or some of the fire equivalents that CAL FIRE uses within ArcGIS. Only law enforcement and SAR have access, so you want to make sure you set those secure settings properly. It becomes real-time documentation and control, and you get statistics. So in this case, this guy driving through with the high-low sirens, you can see exactly where they went. If the neighbor sues you later because you didn't warn them, you can say, hey, I drove right up to your front door with my sirens on, and I'm sorry, but we were there. And likewise, we have a whole set of symbols that we developed for evacuations. If you think about it, like USAR and those guys, they deal with recoveries after an earthquake or after a hurricane, and they have symbols for that, but they don't have symbols for before the bad thing happens. So we created a bunch of symbols that say, like, they're sheltering in place, they're evacuating, they refuse to evacuate. So there's a whole set of symbols in the Caltopo marker library that you can use for that. So in this case, you have people that were alerted, or these guys are evacuating, this person's not, and so forth. Likewise, we suggest driving teams with tracks. If you're doing an ahead of time knock on the door, what we're telling our people is, and this is from a real drill that we did, actually not an actual fire, but we're telling them, walk up to each door, just type a green marker that says, you're evacuating because you knocked on the door and they said they'd leave, or there was no answer, or they need assistance. That's the one where you have to line up someone for them, or they refuse and they're going to shelter in place, that sort of stuff. So you have time to collect that valuable information ahead of time sometimes. This is a real fire, hasty evacuation data. This is just where a bunch of marked units went through with high-low sirens. And at least, after the fact, you have good documentation that shows where you went and the sirens were blaring and, where the gates were locked and you couldn't get through and all that kind of stuff. And it's all in one, data set. So at a minimum, you want to do this. So what that means is you've got to, have some basic training for your deputies or other people, even fire, who may be doing this service. So in the counties that are super fire prone, what we find is they have a lot of joint trainings where they get deputies and firefighters up to speed on Caltopo and say, look, download this app, have it on your phone. You don't have to use it all the time, but when the time comes, we're going to want you to turn it on, load this map, and record tracks while you're driving around with your sirens on. And then documenting by exception is another way. If you're going door to door, you can see here there's two little orange houses with people. Those are people that were approached during a fire after high-low sirens, knocked on their door, and they refused to leave. And there's the address, refused 6100, refused 9501. So you have documentation if their house burns down and they perish, for example, they can't say, or their survivors can't say that you didn't do everything you could to try to, prevent that from happening. Here's a fire where you can also provide another role. You've got spot fires popping up all over the place. And so in this real fire from a couple of summers ago, there's fires popping up all over. And the LE folks, as they're driving around, are putting markers all over. And the fire guys are monitoring that, and they can see where the spot fires are based on the intel that's being gathered by the LE folks that are out there doing evacuations. So that's pretty cool too. You can also use the photo functionality on Caltopo to take photos of the fires or buildings that are on fire as well and document that stuff. Down here, you have traffic blocks marked on here as well. And then here's your CP up in the upper left. So that's another valuable form of documentation as well. Shelters, as I mentioned, shelter staff's not really designed typically, they're really designed to operate an, a functioning shelter for the most part. They're not designed or they're not set up and trained to really build a shelter in an hour or two. And this is the one we built in Marin for a huge fire that was in Santa Rosa and such about 6 or 7 years ago. And we built this whole shelter in like 2 hours. And the reason is we could get 80 volunteers into that place hauling cots and hauling equipment. We got bolt cutters and went out in the West County and basically cut all the locks off all the Red Cross trailers and just loaded all of the cots in our trucks and drove them there. And we just built it. And we had radios and we made it all work. And then all the health people meshed in pretty well because we didn't know anything about how to run a shelter and they knew everything about that. They really didn't know how to build a shelter in an hour. So think about that. That's something you could be asked to do. Roadblock management, another one. People have needs to go in and out. There are often cases where we'll use SAR volunteers to escort people in. It frees up law enforcement and escort them to their house to get their medications or check on their pets or whatever once it's legally allowed to go back into a closed area. Animal rescues kind of overlooked a lot of times. It's gotten better, but there are lots of designated animal rescue agencies. However, they are overwhelmed quickly. And so SAR teams are generally not covered for animal rescue. I'm sure it's the same in Oregon, but if we're doing something inside our own county, we're covered. But our DSW, disaster workers insurance, does not cover us if we're specifically going out to rescue animals. So you have to be very careful how you deploy people in those situations. I don't know if it's the same up there, but I suspect it is. Was that?
We changed statute a few years ago to specifically allow SAR to rescue animals.
Excellent. That's great. I mean, we desperately need to do that. That's great because we have a large animal rescue component of our own team, and we help in these fires a lot, but it's gotten tricky because of that flaw in our insurance system. So anyway, yeah, so I'm glad you guys are more progressive than we are in that regard for sure, man. That's a big miss for us. Population and recovery is another issue we deal with a lot. Uh, I've worked on several fires where this was it was a huge conflict between law and fire because you have different responsibilities and priorities. So the sheriff's in charge of that. They're under huge pressure to repopulate, and the fire guys want everything to be safe, and so do the sheriff. But they don't have the same pressure on them to reopen areas because the sheriff's responsible for that. So anyway, it becomes pretty complex, and you have to be sensitive to that when you're working on the fire because, as we found, the priorities can change by the hour almost in these really dynamic situations. Using divisions is a no-brainer, as we've talked about already. Um, Operations driven rather than plans driven, like SAR typically, and you have to be quick on your feet. So setting up divisions with high-level search managers out there is really good. Fire recovery is changing here. I don't know what's happening up your way, but up until maybe 2 years ago, SAR did almost all of the searching. Well, it was usually SAR plus fire or USAR components doing all of the footprint searching and such. And we've also changed the way we do our search, footprint searching. But over the last 3 or 4 big fires, like Los Angeles last fall, it fell almost entirely to USAR, and I think it's pretty clear through state government that they want that to continue, where you have full-time USAR type people doing the recovery operations rather than SAR volunteers. So I suspect it's going to be a much smaller component of what we do, and that on the SAR side anyway, we're going to be much more focused on the evacuation and running and helping with the evacuation side of things.